Your brand may be staying on top of current trends, but are you agile enough to stay relevant, resilient, and successful as customers, competition, and the world continues to change at a breakneck pace? I'm thrilled to share the newly revised version of my first book, The Agile Brand. I'm calling it The Agile Brand Revisited. It's been updated to reflect our continually changing world, and it provides 7 principles that form the backbone of an agile brand, offering detailed insights and actionable steps for incorporating them into your business strategy. This is the book that started it all, and I'm excited to share it with you. It's now available in print and digital formats and available everywhere. Learn more by going to the Agile Brand Guide website at www.agilebrandguide.com. Welcome to Season 5 of The Agile Brand with Greg Kihlstrom, where we talk with enterprise and technology platform leaders about the people, processes, and platforms that make marketing and customer experience successful, scalable, and sustainable. This is what creates an agile brand. I'm your host, Greg Kihlstrom, advisor and consultant for Fortune 1000 marketing and CX leaders and teams as principal and chief strategist at GK5A, and best-selling author, keynote speaker, entrepreneur, and Agile certified coach. The Agile Brand podcast is brought to you by TEKsystems, an industry leader in full-stack technology services, talent services, and real-world application. For more information, go to teksystems.com. To sign up for the Agile Brand newsletter and get the latest insights and articles on marketing technology and CX, or to purchase a copy of my latest book, House of the Customer, go to gregkihlstrom.com. You can also find all my books on Amazon and other retailers. And now on to the show. Today we're going to talk about empowering great CX in organizations and what it takes from leaders and employees to do so. To help me discuss this topic, I'd like to welcome Mark Slatin, CEO of EmpoweredCX and host of the Delighted Customers podcast. Mark, welcome to the show.
Hey, Greg. Thanks so much for having me on the show. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, looking forward to talking about, I know you and I chat a bit here, so but glad that we can record this and share our conversation with others. So why don't we get started by you giving a little background on yourself and what you're currently doing?
Yep. So my background is 25 years or so in sales and sales management in the Fortune 500. And then after that, 6 years in management consulting, and fast forward 9 years in financial services, where I worked at a bank that included insurance, wealth, retail, and commercial banking, and a mortgage division. And that was in the DC metropolitan area. And I went back into consulting about a year ago with my firm, EmpoweredCX. And the purpose of the firm is to empower leaders to turn indifferent customers into loyal fans. I also host the Delighted Customers podcast, as you mentioned, and I serve on the board of directors of the Customer Experience Professionals Association, and I am a certified customer experience professional.
Nice. Keep him busy there. So nice. Well, yeah. So let's dive in here. And the first thing I wanted to talk about with you is how leaders can empower greater customer experience within their organizations. So from your perspective, and you talk with a lot of leaders in this area, what are leaders missing when it comes to their priorities and their investments for improvements to the customer experience?
Yeah, I think, Greg, Bain did a study a while back, and they surveyed over 300 companies, and CEOs, 80% of them felt that their organization delivered a superior customer experience, but only 8% of their customers agreed. And so they call that the delivery gap. I call it the experience gap, because it's a gap between what leadership believes their customers are experiencing and what's actually happening. And I think a lot of times traditional financial metrics can be misleading. You look at revenue or you look at income, there's a lot of things that go into that soup. But just because you had year over year revenue increases does not mean you have a strong customer base. Yeah. And so more recently, the XM Institute conducted a study across all industries, and Net Promoter Score is down double digits since 2018 across all industries. So I know we're probably going to dive into this a little bit deeper later on, but that means that there's an experience gap. And And now with less staff, with greater silos between departments, with burned out employees, that gap can and will and is growing larger. And quite frankly, customer experience needs to be embedded into the culture rather than bolted on like another project. And that means creating what Fred Reichheld, the inventor of NPS, Net Promoter Score, calls a miracle wheel in his book Winning on Purpose. And that's moving toward maturity and embedding CX into the way an organization thinks and acts.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the acts part there, just to kind of build on that, the acts part there is pretty key. And I think leaders, as you're saying, there's a gap between perception and reality, and there's a gap, and there's certainly been some changes over the last couple of years. So lots of stuff in flux. And so, like, what are the successful traits of leaders that can balance? There's competing priorities, which again kind of goes back to that, what they actually do. You can say customers number one, but what do you actually prioritize and do? What are successful traits of leaders that are able to actually balance those things, and balance great CX and a focus on CX with other business priorities that are also necessary?
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you brought that up because let's face it, there are competing priorities. I worked at a bank that acquired two different firms, different banks that were pretty large relative to the size of our bank at the time, and that becomes a priority. That integration of the two organizations, both financially, culturally, every other way, is going to be key to the success of the outcome of the new company. And I think the idea is to move toward a systematic way of creating value for the most valuable customers. So one thing I've learned in the last few years is that it's not trying to serve all customers equally, but it's understanding who first your most valuable customers are, and then what is it that they desire most that would create the most value for them. And it means that the CX strategy should be at the core of all corporate strategy. Like Jeff Bezos said, the number one thing that made us successful, and that's Amazon, of course, by far is an obsessive compulsive focus on the customer. And that means developing a set of CX core competencies. So when we talked earlier about the miracle wheel that Fred talks about, I like to use the CXPA 5 core competencies, which are customer insights and understanding, CX strategy, design insights and implementation, metrics, measurements, and value, and leadership and accountability.
Yeah. So, yeah, and to build on that, as well as to kind of go back to what you were talking about at the beginning as far as measurements go, how do you balance the measure? So there's a prioritization aspect that we talked about a little bit, and then there's the measuring in the right way, right? So meaningful measurements would be, certainly we want to make sure that we are measuring the customer experience. We also obviously need to measure business KPIs. How do leaders balance those two and not come away with the wrong correlation, causation, and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think sometimes we could think of them as mutually exclusive. And I think a better way to think of them is three concentric circles, like the X data, which of course is the experience data, which would include things like customer sentiment. The O data, which is the operational data, the KPIs that have to do with activity and what's transactions or what's actually happened. And then the financial, the F data, which is, okay, what's profitable for us? What's bringing us, which customers are bringing us the most business, and what products or services are behind that. And in not keeping those in silos, but bringing those together and looking at those maybe in a singular dashboard, right? So you can see, oh, we discovered that call times were extended, call waits were triple what they normally are. The abandon rate was 35%. 1 out of every 3 customers dropped off the call. And what's the reason they're calling in the first place? Maybe they're calling in because they can't get what they need on a less expensive channel, like like you're online. So understanding how all three of those work together, part of the CX leader's role and responsibility is to tell the story of what's happening. We have, an increase in call wait time, and therefore, and we're noticing also the customers, are less satisfied, they're less likely to recommend, et cetera. And it's some of our best customers. So there's revenue at risk here because of this. Now let's dive deeper into understanding what's causing all this. And there could be any number of things that are causing those, but that's part of it, as I think harmonizing the different data and viewing that as not mutually exclusive, but breaking down the silos so you can look at those together.
Yeah, because I mean, it takes, and I've talked about this a bit with NPS and other what I would call lagging indicators. I'm a believer in using those, and I think there's value in using them. But it's also, I think one of the things you're touching on here is the diagnosis of this stuff takes a lot of metrics, and it doesn't mean we measure everything, because that would take all day, every day to analyze. But we do need to mix leading indicators and measure that stuff, so we can kind of do the forensics on, okay, we had a huge dip or a huge spike in NPS or CES or something like that. Why? Right. And then kind of answer that. But I think it also, you can do that from a customer experience perspective, but you also need to do that with the business KPIs as well. I mean, would you say that the brands, the category leaders, visionaries, whatever, quadrant wave, format you want to talk in, are they doing this better than the laggards here, or is everybody still trying to figure this out?
Well, I think generally speaking, the leaders are doing a better job of understanding what, where the gaps are and what's causing the gap. And it's because they do have a systematic approach to it. It's never by accident, right? They've built in good listening systems where, sometimes people just give up on getting B2B feedback. It's really hard. You can't use a simple digital electronic survey and get accurate B2B data. You really need to, for a whole variety of reasons. So, and if you're in the B2B space, you probably already know that, but developing ways to listen, even at the very least, if it's asking those employees who are closest to the customers what they're hearing, what they're thinking, what they're feeling from the customers, that correlates to the, like you said, the operational KPIs, the other data that's raising a red flag for us. That's something, but it really, the winners, the leaders have this as systematic. It's something they built in as part of their core competencies.
Yeah.
And of course, tools like journey mapping are great ways to get employee involvement, to get employee feedback across functions, and to help you generate solutions.
Before we continue, I'd like to make sure you're aware of the upcoming CXPS 2023 conference, May 8 through 11, 2023 in Durham, North Carolina. CXPS is a great CX event focused on professional services firms that want to know how to take the next steps to make their firm successful in integrating client experience with their firm's strategic initiatives. To learn more and register for the conference, go to clientexperience.org/CXPS-conference. That's clientexperience.org/CXPS-conference. And you can register with the code AGILE200, that's AGILE 200, for $200 off your tickets. You can hear from top professional services executives and CX thought leaders like myself through a combination of keynotes, breakout sessions, workshops, and panel discussions. Make sure to register at clientexperience.org/CXPS-conference with the code AGILE200 for $200 off your tickets. Now let's get back to the show. We've been talking about this from the business perspective. Let's shift and talk about this from the customer perspective. And how does a brand know and understand where their biggest gaps are? I mean, we talked about this a little bit with measurement, but still, from a customer perspective, how does a brand understand where their biggest gaps, as well as what's going to be most appreciated by their customers? Because the two are not always the same, right?
Yeah, I think it kind of does lead back to doing a great job of listening.
Yeah.
So when you get data, you're going to have a whole bunch of quantitative data that comes from, for example, experience. What is the verbatims that go along with that? And I recently had Rob Markey on my podcast, and he talked about the importance of understanding not just the score, but the reason for the score.
Yeah.
And that's relative to net promoter. So if you are trying to get a diagnosis for what is going on, yes, it is understanding the reporting that comes back from your voice of the customer program. It's understanding the operational data. And there are some cases where you need to have an alert and on things that are hot priority as you build out your client journey. And I know you talk a lot about journey map orchestration. The map is supposed to be like a living, breathing thing. It's not just a one-time, two-dimensional. Hopefully, it's not, and then it goes
Right.
collects dust. But like, where on that map do we need to put a beacon, an alert that can help signal something going wrong? And in some cases, we need to respond right away. So there's a closed feedback loop that should be in place that we can respond to immediately. And so just being aware of what those are, what those hot spots are, and also noticing the verbatims about customers. Either one, they're buying more of a certain type of product, or they're clicking on a certain place on your site, expressing more interest, or they're just saying in the either anecdotal or the verbatims that come electronically or in the focus groups, however you're developing or you're gathering feedback, they're saying, this is what I need. This is you don't have enough of this, or I love this, keep doing more of it. That's the kind of things that we need to dig down further and fully comprehend and design for.
Yeah. Yeah. And to compound the challenges, I guess, for the CX practitioners out there, customer expectations are continually on the rise as well, right? I mean, any reports, surveys I see, there's always, there's either a disruptor or some kind of category leader that continually is setting new standards, and then everybody, whether it's in the same industry or not, has those expectations. An easy example is Amazon next day shipping and stuff. Now who wants to wait 5 days to get anything anymore, right? So do you think that this is just the way it's going to be, and things are going to expectations continue to increase? Or how does this impact how brands have to continually kind of reset their delivery expectations and things like that?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. There was a report that was conducted by the XM Institute that looked at companies looked at consumer feedback from 2018 to 2022, and every industry dropped, and I mentioned that earlier.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're having a drop in service levels, and it's caused by staff shortages, supply shortages, supply chain issues. You've got quiet quitting,
Yeah.
lack of employee engagement. All these things are causing it. And go back to the culture of an organization, which is really what drives customer experience. The employee experience, the customer experience go hand in hand. And I think tapping into both of those is going to be critical for winners. But also, I do think that there's companies like Amazon, as you suggested, have raised the bar for what expectations could be. Like, why do I have to even call in for a problem?
Right.
Why am I calling in? And why can't they just get this right? Why do I have to work so hard on this online ordering process? The bar is being set, and in many cases, not all, but those companies within an industry that can deliver outstanding superior service and really are focusing on the customer have a chance to really gain some distance from their peers right now. So we've got all this negative stuff going on with rising interest rates and people losing their jobs and quiet quitting and wars overseas. But this could be a real opportune time for companies to double down on customer experience and building it into the way they work and their culture and separating themselves from the competition.
Yeah, yeah, agreed. What does this mean then in terms of measurement? I mean, with rising expectations, are the typical brands measurements correct, or do they need to rethink in terms of measurement to kind of keep up with these things? And I know, there's a lot of variables here, but just generally speaking, like, do we need to think differently about measurement as customer expectations increase?
I think we talk through some of this, Greg, but just to pull on that thread is kind of think about it more as a dashboard, getting all the data around the customer together in one place and making sure that you have systems to collect and gather those insights, and then a place where you can look at it, and then as CX practitioners and CX professionals be able to tell the story. Right.
Yeah.
Executives are busy. So what are the top three themes this quarter or this time frame that I can glean out of this data? Here's the quantitative data. Here's the qualitative data that supports it. If you've got video to share customer testimonials or responses to support the data, all the more powerful. But I think we need to do that, and we need to take advantage of things like AI and machine learning, which can help us get better data faster. But the wheel that is this framework that we talked about earlier with competencies that can help, get not only take these insights, which we can now get faster, but to understand which measures and metrics and measurements, and to build in this leadership and accountability culture. Those are the things that we need to look at. And I would say I would add one other thing to that, which I alluded to earlier, and that is to understand what your best customers are, right? And that may be understanding what the customer lifetime value of your customers are, and coming up with that, and then maybe looking at, Dr. Peter Fader from Wharton talks about the customer base audit, which is looking at the top 10% and looking at them in these deciles, and then maybe the next 10%. And what does that contribute to your profitability, your bottom line? Understand what those customers want, your most valuable customers, and how are you going to create value for those customers? I think that's going to be a different way for companies to start thinking. The leaders will think that way, not just in terms of improving the experience across the ocean, but targeting their best customers.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. And so you touched on this a couple times here, as far as the culture, the company culture aspect of things, and just I'm definitely a big believer that employee experience and customer experience have a powerful connection. So I wanted to talk about that a little bit as well. So, it's certainly not news for anybody in the CX profession that there is this strong connection, but have you seen an increase in urgency in connecting these two at the brands you work and talk with? I mean, you mentioned quiet quitting and great resignation and all these things. I mean, certainly customers feel all of that, but are you seeing that brands are really starting to get this and starting to do something about it?
I think you're right. I think that all the reasons you mentioned are putting a spotlight on the employee experience more so than ever, and so you're seeing more activities around that, more energy and emphasis around that. And you're 100% right that they are directly linked. I know that I've seen some people write recently that because companies like Amazon have had some employee related issues and still perform well financially and still have high customer ratings, that they're not linked. I'm a non-believer of that. I think that they are, and ultimately over time, when you have employees who are not engaged, who are not willing to give discretionary effort, who are unhappy, there's no way that can't ultimately impact the customer experience.
Yeah.
So yes, there's more of that. Unfortunately, it's come to this point where we've had this confluence of work shortages. We've had, burned out employees. Part of that was the pandemic, but part of it was just maybe the boiled frog, and and now
Right.
the frog is getting heated up too much, and they recognize that without employees, I mean, so there's layoffs happening, but there's still openings. It's we're in a weird time,
Yeah.
and it's finding the right employees. And now there's a competitive, they're trying to compete for the best employees, and that's why the culture is so important. And for everyone, that's going to be a little different. Yeah, but I've seen some companies kind of, I guess I would call it, over rotate on fun and games and
Yeah.
offering things like candy and popcorn and stuff. Not every employee wants that, so it's really understanding what your employees want, and trying to help. And I would include the employees and collaborate with them to decide on how to design something that will keep them most engaged.
Yeah, definitely agreed. And to kind of reiterate what you were saying as well, I mean, I think when CX is good without good employee experience, I think it's very expensive because you're paying for turnover, and you're always onboarding newly disgruntled employees that are going to quit a few weeks or months later to do that. And I also, it's not sustainable, right? So I do think that the brands that are, they're kind of shoring up the gaps by just either hiring or automating or all of those things. I just can't see it lasting for the long term without them making some fundamental shift. Like I often say with customer experience, I think everybody agrees on the premise of a good customer experience is a win for the brand, right? Like nobody's really going to argue with that. What they do in practice can vary vastly. I don't think anyone necessarily disagrees that a good employee experience translates to good CX, but what do you think is keeping people from investing in this further?
In investing more in the employee experience.
Yeah, yeah, and in that connection, making the connection clear, and because I guess the other part of this is I think a key part of improving the employee experience and that gives people more value and purpose to their work is in actually tying their success and their roles to the customer.
Hmm.
So, again, it seems pretty obvious. I know I say this all the time. Lots of people say this all the time, but what's holding brands back from doing this when it seems so obvious?
I think what you're looking at in many of these cases is a look at traditional financial metrics, and people, unfortunately, in this C-suite are often looking at a set of reports that include income statements and balance sheets, and if they look okay,
Yeah.
if the net number of customers, if they even know what that number is staying the same, or revenues are staying the same or going up, they don't dig deeper into understanding the health of their customer base, and and also, now the health of their employee base, and understanding that there is a financial correlation between the health of the employee base to these other business outcomes. And until HR departments are saying, hey, we can't fill all these work tickets for jobs, we
Right.
I remember before I left the bank, we had 2 years consecutive running record number of job openings.
Wow.
I don't think
Yeah.
we were alone. I think there were, just a number of companies that are having trouble. Industries where, I spoke to someone yesterday in insurance, and this was true for commercial banking, and it may be in your industry, is there are people graduating college now that are not attracted to certain industries. So
Yeah.
that's not just a company thing, that's an industry. If you're part of an industry association, those are the conversations you should be having, is, how do we make these jobs more attractive to bring in the right people? Or if we can't get as many new people, how can we groom our own and develop, a professional development program that can put the right people in place? But I think
Yeah.
I think it's a bit of the focus for years of leaders has been on traditional financial metrics. And Fred Reichheld talks about this in his book, Winning on Purpose, about how much of a mask that can be to really what's going on beneath the surface with your customer base.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. Well, Mark, thanks so much for joining the show. I've got one last question before we wrap up. So you're a fellow podcaster as well. So your podcast is called Delighted Customers. Definitely recommend people check it out. But I wanted to get just a couple thoughts on, because you have a podcast, you also do consulting, so we share some similarities there, and just wanted to see how has doing a podcast, and you talk with some phenomenal CX leaders on it, how has it shaped the way that you approach consulting work, or maybe vice versa? And what have you learned from the process of doing the podcast?
Well, thanks for asking the question. At first, I'll say kudos to you for doing a great podcast.
Oh, thank you.
The Agile brand, and you do a professional job in the quality of it, but also, most people may not know this, but the quantity of podcasts you turn out is insane. I don't know how one person. I know you have people helping on the editing and production side, but still, it's a lot of work, folks. If you've never done this, let me tell you, to do it, even just to do it, but to do it well, is a lot of work. So,
thank you. I appreciate that.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm a learner, so I love to learn. And one of the benefits of having people like you'll be on my podcast,
yeah,
and other luminaries in the CX space, is that you get to hear cutting edge thought from thought leaders in the space who are willing to share, and you get it in a format that's real and it's a conversation, it's a discussion, and it's not just necessarily reading from a book in print. So it makes it more, if you will, digestible to me and to the audience as well. So lots of great, and it's also very current. Like you and I just talked about some very current topics, current events. And so you get to do that as well. But to give context to our space in the customer experience profession by this particular format, and I've learned so much by listening to these guests about their thoughts and kind of seaming it all together and getting to, from a selfish standpoint, getting to ask the questions that I'm curious about.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And I love learning, and I learn something every time you and I talk as well. I really appreciate you coming on the show. And so, again, I'd like to thank Mark Slatin, CEO of EmpoweredCX and host of the Delighted Customers podcast, for joining the show. You can learn more about Mark, EmpoweredCX, and the Delighted Customers podcast by following the links in the show notes. Thanks again for listening to the Agile Brand with Greg Kihlstrom podcast, brought to you by Tech Systems. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to subscribe on your podcast channel of choice and leave us a rating so that others can find the show more easily. You can access more episodes of the show at www.gregkihlstrom.com. That's GregKihlstrom.com. To get a copy of my latest book, House of the Customer, visit my website, or you can find it on Amazon or other retailers. The Agile Brand is produced by Missing Link, a Latina-owned, strategy-driven, creatively fueled production co-op. From ideation to creation, they craft human connections through intelligent, engaging, and informative content. Until next time, stay agile.